about some of the characteristics of clouds, and I'm going to get into the specifics of CloudStack, what it offers, what it does, a couple of the tools that you can work with, both to use CloudStack and to explore CloudStack if you don't know much about it. So there's a lot of buzz around cloud right now, and frankly, a lot of times people just hear the buzzword, and I don't think they know what they're really discussing. NIST has a really good definition of cloud, which is on-demand self-service. Basically, you need to be able to plop down a credit card, or when you're talking about private cloud, you need to be able to plop down your credentials and have service right then. If it takes a week to provision, it's not cloud, okay? Broad network access, if you can't get to it over the network, it's really not cloud. Resource pooling, basically your storage, your network, your compute, these are being pooled and distributed among a lot of different users or departments or companies depending on what you're talking about. Rapid elasticity, if I can't spin up 1,000 or 100 VMs in 15, 20 minutes, we're really not talking about cloud. Measured service, if I can't bill you at the end of the month, or if you're in a private cloud situation, if I can't do a chargeback at the end of the month, if I can't tell you how much you've used, again, we're not talking about cloud. Those 5 are the NIST definition of cloud. The 6th one, which I added, is API access. If it doesn't have an API, if you have to click your way through something, it isn't cloud, okay? I'm not going to spend much time on this. Is anybody unclear, as Jeff was talking about the stick a letter in front of AAS? Anybody unclear on these things? Anybody not familiar with the different types of clouds? So what I'm talking about today is infrastructure as a service cloud, not PaaS or SaaS. I'm also not going to talk a lot about deployment models. Is anybody confused about hybrid or private or public clouds? Okay. So I don't think I need to spend much time on this one either. Is anybody unconvinced about open source in the room? Good, okay. I do the presentation for a bunch of different groups, and sometimes you talk to people who aren't really sure that open source is that important. I think it is. You're going to be hearing from people today talking about OpenStack. Is there Yucca? Is there any Yucca talks today? Okay. But there's OpenStack, there's Yucca, there's CloudStack, there's OpenNebula for our friends in Europe. All of these, as far as I'm concerned, are great. It's open source cloud. The things that I worry about that I don't want to see become the only options are things like VMware or Amazon Web Services. Not that there's anything wrong with AWS, but I don't want it to be the only option. So, all right, let's talk about CloudStack. First, I want to talk about how we got to Apache. How many folks are aware CloudStack is an Apache project? Okay. CloudStack has a long history. A lot of people's first introduction to CloudStack was actually last year when they decided to try to make it a Apache project. It's actually been around since 2008, 2007 as a startup called VMOps. It was then released under GPL v3 in May of 2010. Cloud.com was acquired by Citrix in 2011 and then made entirely open source in August 2011. That, by the way, is a really fun story, and if you run into my colleague David Nally, I would invite you to buy him a beverage and ask him to tell you about it. I won't go into it here, but it's a fun little story. And you'd be amazed at some of the corporate decisions that are made very informally by one person. Relicensed and proposed to Apache, a lot of people were coming to us and saying, we like CloudStack, we have some problems with the governance, we have some problems with GPL v3. They heard that and they basically donated it to Apache. Was accepted as an incubating project in April, and we had our first major release in November of last year. If the vote goes well, we'll have our first point release in about a week. Point of advice, when somebody says, hey, would anybody like to be a release manager for the point releases? Do not raise your hand. You just kind of look around and wait for somebody else to do it. Guess who raised their hand? All right. So why Apache? Governance model, very well known. Companies are very comfortable with Apache, not so comfortable with other governance models. Apache has been around for a very long time and has shepherded a number of very successful projects and a lot of developers in the Apache community. So now, we are finally talking about Apache CloudStack. It's only taken me 9 minutes. So what is it? Open source infrastructure as a service, supports multiple hypervisors, high availability, complex networking, firewall, load balancer, all sorts of good stuff, VPN configurations in a multi-tenant environment. So what is it really? Set of applications that provide separation between tenants. Handles allocating your compute resources, lets users provision things themselves, manages high availability, massively scalable. We have customers, or I should say Citrix has customers using cloud platform, CloudStack, in production with upwards of 30,000 physical nodes. Okay, so it scales. Resource usage accounting, we provide the accounting, though not the actual billing software. You have to get that from a third party or plop everything into Excel or LibreOffice or whatever and work up your accounting on your own. One of the nice things about CloudStack is the UI. I like to describe it as beautiful, like a kitten riding a unicorn over a rainbow. This is not actually the CloudStack UI, by the way. But it's important that we have one. It's a reference implementation of the API. There's nothing you can do via the UI that you can't do with the API. And in fact, there are some things you can do with the API you can't really do through the UI easily, such as launch multiple VMs really easily. Built with HTML, CSS, and jQuery, uses JSP for localization. And we have people who do all kinds of customization to the UI. We have some people who have rewritten it entirely and offering private or public clouds with their own implementation of the UI. We have other folks who have just basically reskinned it and put their company's logo on it or somewhere in between. This is just one screenshot from the API or from the UI. No actual kittens or unicorns. This is some of the stuff that you can do. We have documentation on how you can reskin everything. This is sort of a representation of everything that's in CloudStack. We have the API, both the native API and EC2 and CloudStack API and the EC2 S3 API, Amazon translation layer. There's a self-service portal, metering, dashboard, image management, all these good things. Basically, a lot of people ask me, what's the difference between CloudStack and OpenStack? The biggest difference, aside from one's written in Java, one's in Python, different governance structures, things like that, OpenStack has a series of projects that you assemble or you get a distribution from a company that put together all the components you need or some of the components you want to run infrastructure as a service cloud. CloudStack is opinionated and productized. It's basically everything that we think somebody would need to run an IaaS cloud in one component. You install CloudStack, boom, you have all the pieces in one area. Real quick, any questions so far? Is everyone still awake? I know I saw all the cookies are gone, so I figure at least 10 of you are in a sugar coma as we speak. Yeah, it balances out, right? Yeah. One cookie, one cup of coffee. One cookie, one cup of coffee. Okay. So let's talk about the basic architecture of CloudStack. So you need a management server which stores all of its information in a MySQL database. Anybody have an idea what happens if our management server falls over? What happens to all the VMs that are running? Exactly. Yes. The management server can puke all over itself and it's fine. All the VMs, the networking, everything stays up. Everything keeps working. Now you can't use the API or manage it easily, but if that particular component falls over, you're fine. Then you have zones, pods, clusters, primary storage, secondary storage, and I'll talk about all that in a second. Hypervisor support. We support KVM, Zen servers and cloud platform, VMware via vCenter, and bare metal if you have IPMI. So you can use a number of different modes or mix and match. You don't have to have all of one or the other. You can use, for example, I live in St. Louis. There's a public cloud provider there called Contigix, and they offer a cloud with VMware, KVM, or Xen, depending on how much you want to pay. So if you want to go premium, you pay for the VMware and you get that. If you want to go cheap, you go KVM. Let's talk about zones. So basically, folks are familiar with AWS regions, right? Yes, okay. So zones are very similar in CloudStack. It's usually a geographic location. It shares secondary storage across the entire zone, and you have a single network model for the entire zone. We support a couple different network models in CloudStack, and I'll talk about networking in a little bit. Pod is sort of just a logical container for a rack or a row of racks, shares a guest network among the pod. A cluster in CloudStack, they all have to be the same machine type. They all have to have the same hypervisor, usually a maximum of about 15 machines, depending on the hypervisor. We're working on upping that, I believe, with 4.1.0. But basically, everything in that has to be the same. You can't have, 5 servers with 24 gigs of RAM and 5 servers with 32 and different CPUs, things like that. Reason for that being, in the cluster is where you're going to be moving. You can migrate VMs back and forth, and they have to all expect the same type of hypervisor, the same type of resources. Primary storage in a cluster is, let me back up. The cluster shares primary storage, and I'll talk about what primary and secondary are here in a sec. So secondary storage is where you store your ISOs, snapshots, templates, and everything. I believe the analog in OpenStack is Glance. Is that right? Historically has been NFS, but we're adding support for Gluster, Ceph, and some other ones in various stages. And it's managed by a secondary storage VM, which is a guest VM that runs in the cluster that basically handles shuttling your images back and forth and managing all of that. Manages your snapshots and all that good stuff. Again, this is all basically plopped in when you install CloudStack. So no separate setup required. Primary storage supports NFS, iSCSI, CLVM, requires a shared mount point for all of the hypervisors to talk to, and can use local storage. Primary storage can use local, but then there's no high availability, there's no migration. For some customers, for some users that need really, really high performance in certain workloads, this is great. I don't recommend it for most workloads, because if a host falls over, there goes your VMs. Any questions? Okay. Management server, we already covered this a little bit. API, UI, stateless, all functionality is available via API. Basically, you can set it up to do unauthenticated API access for testing on the local host, but I don't recommend this for production. Authenticated is on 8080, and you can get responses in XML or JSON. CloudStack allocation. I usually get questions about how does CloudStack decide where it's going to put VMs. The answer is basically you tell it what you want. So for some, if you're energy conscious and you want to fill up servers before you turn on another one, you can do first fit. You can also, you can do fill first. You can do first fit, basically pick the first host that responds and go with that. You can do dispersion so that you spread out your workload, whatever you want to do. If you don't like any of the ones that are available with CloudStack, you can write your own. You can do over-provisioning, and you can also do allocation by OS preference. High availability is not really high availability. It's, the marketing folks like to talk about high availability. It's really, really fast mean time to recovery. So basically, VM falls over, CloudStack goes, damn, and spins another one up, okay? But it does not have a second VM sitting there waiting like, heartbeat to take over, okay? So it is not a magical HA solution. The idea for CloudStack really is that people use CloudStack like cloud, and they write applications so that they, spill out rather than up. So it doesn't matter so much if an independent instance falls over. Yeah?
You mentioned earlier a VM falls over, CloudStack spins another one up. Is that in fact so, or can it spin up the same one?
Yeah.
That it's running off persistent storage.
Sorry, yeah, it can spin up the same one. Yeah, yeah, sorry. Yeah, thanks for that. Any other questions?
Does that make it the same state?
Should be, yes. Yeah.
It's back from a few slides when you talked about the management server falling over. So what happens when you get your management server back up again? Are your instances that are currently running manageable? Is there a risk of Mac or is it?
Yes. Yeah, no, the instances are still manageable. It's just a matter of, you're not losing anything when it falls over. So, and a lot of people set up redundant management servers, so that's not a problem. So if one piece of hardware just dies, it's not an issue. But if you just have one management server, you're still covered. Did I see another hand, or just folks waving themselves or fanning? Okay. Networking. Basically, CloudStack manages all this stuff for you: DHCP, VLANs, firewall, NAT, routing, VPN, all that good stuff. We can also work with physical network hardware. So F5, Big IP, NetScaler, Juniper, SRX. These things, unfortunately, I have to talk about more from a hypothetical perspective because for some odd reason, Citrix is not willing to buy me all of this equipment to use at home. Yeah, I don't know. Networking types. We offer basic and advanced networking. Basically, you have your basic networking, which is really easy. Advanced for more complicated setups. And then we have several networks. There we go. We have several networks that are used by CloudStack to communicate. So basically a management network, private network for system VMs to speak over, public network facing the internet or whatever, and a guest network where network VMs are provisioned on, and so forth. You can have these all on one physical network, or you can, if you have a really redundant and complicated setup, you can have each of these on different physical interfaces and so forth. Security groups for folks that don't want to depend on VLANs. Basically, you can use security groups, layer 3 isolation, very similar to what Amazon has. So you have to assume a quasi-trusted layer 2 network. All the filtering and isolation happens at the bridge. Default is, of course, deny all traffic. Any questions on this? Yeah.
In the network stuff, is there a bandwidth management, like enforcement for like using particular VM and it gets so much bandwidth?
I think that's in the works. Yeah. Usage accounting, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but basically provides all the stats and information you would need for billing and whatnot. Shows the VM count, CPU usage, disk allocation, all of that good stuff. There are integration how-tos for basically using all this data with like Excel or Amaya, Ubersmith, Cloud Portal, which is a Citrix product. Any questions on, yeah?
On the usage accounting, do you integrate with the other projects that you made, CloudStack overall integrate with, like Ceph or Swift or something like that?
It gets information from whatever happens on our side. So wherever we make a call to those things, that's where the usage accounting comes from. So, yeah.
Distributing this across multiple data centers, is there any latency issues or requirements around it?
I mean, basically that depends on your setup. I have not done this stuff, I have not done that personally. I know we have users that are doing it. But most of it so far is set up in single instances, but I know, yeah. So it's basically dependent on your set of normal operations, yeah.
Is usage accounting still available if the management server goes down?
It probably stops collecting usage accounting at that point, yeah.
Okay.
But it's not, when I talk about the management server go down, I should mention this is not like an everyday occurrence or whatever, at least I hope not. Any other questions? All right. Real quick, wanted to talk about the EC2 configuration because I know a lot of folks are using AWS and might want to use this for dev testing or something. We do provide an EC2 compatible interface. It used to be a separate, when Citrix was running the project, it was a separate thing. I believe it's called CloudBridge. You basically had to install this. It wasn't particularly onerous, but you had to set it up on your own. It is now rolled into Apache CloudStack incubating. SOAP and REST interface. REST interface is under heavy development. I think it's pretty stable at this point. This is a slightly old slide. It's pretty easy to drop this in. Basically, you can go into the global configuration, you register the API keys, do the certificate and all that stuff, set up the environment variables, set up your Amazon, your matching instance types, and I'll walk through this a little bit in the slides here. But it takes all of about 5 to 10 minutes following the documentation the first time. So basically, by the way, I imported these slides into LibreOffice from PowerPoint, and it's done some amazingly weird things to the slides. But basically, one way to do this is in the GUI. You just click over and toggle a few bits, and you're done. The other way to do it is via an API call. Again, all very simple stuff to do. Generate your keys, again, via the GUI or via the API. Register your user. Provide the Amazon instance types. So basically, you want an instance type that matches like the Amazon offerings, like M1 small or whatever. Set up your shell environment. You can use Bodo with this. By the way, these slides, Tim, is there like are you going to have these slides collected somewhere or just put them up on SlideShare?
If people send them to me, I'll get them linked up to the video page.
Okay, I'll send those to you. That's usually the first question I get, by the way. I'm pleased that that wasn't the first question I got here. It's usually, are the slides going to be up somewhere? So anyway, so you can walk through the Boto example here. If you don't want to set up, so generally speaking, CloudStack requires at least 2 nodes to work with. If you don't happen to have 2 physical servers spare or just don't feel like going through all that, there is a developer testing environment called DevCloud. Right now works in VirtualBox, and there's another project underway to make it work under KVM. So basically, you can set up a single node with KVM and set everything up within it. But you can grab the DevCloud image, boot it up in VirtualBox, and you're good. So yeah, if you have any problems with that, this is under very heavy development. CloudStack, when we went over to Apache, there was a lot of work to get from the Citrix development environment into Apache. A lot of people looked around and said, you know, we don't like building with Ant. Let's try Maven. You know, there's a whole bunch of work to go that way. And so what we did for DevCloud 6 months ago is very different from what we're doing now, and it's still under pretty heavy development heading to 4.1.0. Let's just ignore that. There's also some Python management tools. There's CloudMonkey, which is kind of new with this release, but it's a command line environment working with CloudStack. Jason Hancock has also created a CloudStack client, which is still a little bit rough, but worth working with. This is kind of a basic example of just spinning up some stuff in that. Any other questions before I move on? Going once? Yeah.
The multicast support in the network functionality in the network.
What about? It's a good question. I don't know. I know we don't. We are working on IPv6 multicast. I'm not sure. So, yeah.
There are virtualization solutions there, KVM and VMware, but no VirtualBox?
No VirtualBox. KVM, Zen, and VMware right now. None that I'm aware of. Patch is accepted. I know there's a lot of talk about Hyper-V, but nobody has actually, you know, there's been a lot of talk and a couple functional specs, but I have not actually seen code drop for Hyper-V. So, yeah.
Image support, any support for OBF or OVA import?
It depends on the hypervisor. So it's not really through, if your hypervisor supports it, then we can work with it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had before about all the different network types. Can you do course and essentially prioritization of the networks, or are they all just the same?
I'm sorry, say again?
So we had all the different network types up before, such as management, the internal public networks. Assuming they're all on one set of hardware, can you do course for it, as in give priority to certain network types?
So like giving priority to HTTP or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe you can do that. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Does it allow tenants to define their own networks?
I'm sorry?
Does it allow tenants to define their own networks?
Yes. Yeah. Within reason.
To maintain all state inside the white-scale database, the management server.
Mhm.
You mentioned if the management server goes down and can come back up, does it then have to poll to see what's changed to recreate that state, or perhaps an authoritative support?
No, it's in the database. It's not going to go and poll everything.
Does CloudStack manage HA with the database at all, or how does it deal with that
Failure of
the white-scale database that contains that state?
that is basically you need to if you're worried about that, you're going to need to have
Sort it out yourself.
yeah. Sorry. Yeah, back in the red shirt.
You guys have security policies and auditing.
I'm sorry, say again?
Security policies, is there anyone on the team responsible for writing up and checking auditing security for OpenStack?
For CloudStack? So do we have a security, you mean like for the Apache project? Not currently. Apache has its own security project. We do not have like a specific security team at the moment. There's been some discussion about it, but it hasn't gotten off the ground. It's a good question. Anybody else? Yeah, back there.
S3 API versus native, what we lose when we get.
What do you lose in the S3 API?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I understand why you've got the S3 API there, but going forward, I assume it's better just to use the native API, yeah?
So basically, all we're trying to do with the S3 API is provide compatibility with what you've got at Amazon. There is obviously a lot more functionality that's available via our API. Anything you can do with CloudStack that isn't available in S3 or EC2, basically. So I don't have a specific list of features, but yeah. And so there's no way for us to put into the EC2 or S3 API things that aren't already there. If I would also add, fidelity with that is one of our goals, but probably not as primary as, say, a project like Yucca, so. Any other questions? Yeah.
OpenStack has like really, really broad community backing, where that community is not just users, but also companies basically throwing their weight behind this.
Mm-hmm.
For CloudStack, that seems to be a little reduced. Thoughts?
That sounds like a slightly leading question. So, yeah, thank you. So basically, how to answer that diplomatically?
You don't need to. It's
so-
LCA, you don't need to be diplomatic.
Okay, so the first thing I would say is look at the actual contributor numbers for OpenStack and actual Git commits versus the number of companies that say they are committers for OpenStack. Because OpenStack claims something like 200 plus companies. The actual commits are less when you size them up by company. The other thing I would say is, so we have a number of companies that are involved. It's an Apache project, so we don't count companies specifically. We have a guy, for example, who works with a company called PC Extreme in the Netherlands. He is a committer, or he's actually a PPMC member as himself, not as PC Extreme. I am a committer and a PPMC member on my behalf, not for Citrix. So it is less about, specifically which company is backing it and more about the people that are involved in the actual trajectory of development. So, I mean, if you look at the actual development that's going on, we have a fair number of contributions coming from companies outside of Citrix and outside of just, now if you're talking about distributors, is your question based around who's distributing it as opposed to, you asked about users.
Just based on like number of companies that have sort of publicly stated that they're throwing their weight behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not they're actively contributing is rather secondary.
I'm not sure that's true. I mean, what good does it do to say I'm supporting this when you don't do anything? It's easy to sign on to a marketing effort. It's significantly harder to actually contribute.
Well, if I may say so, if you're thinking that actually contributing code is the only way that you can contribute, I would say that's
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's probably a lot of, hey, that looks like a great bandwagon to be on. Sign us up. So, any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, it's a standard Apache contributor agreement. So either a CCLA if you're contributing on behalf of a company or ICLA if you're contributing on your own behalf.
Do you find that causes friction at all?
I'm sorry?
Do you find that causes any friction for people contributing?
I have not seen it. I mean, it's, no, not so far. Is there not a CLA for OpenStack or for other projects?
There's none for staff. I don't know about staff.
There is a CLA, it does not include copyright side numbers.
Okay.
So it just basically states that yes, you're capable of making this contribution here.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that's dissimilar to what Apache has, if I'm not mistaken. Could be. I don't have it memorized. It's not. It wasn't a huge concern for me. So.
It has a sub-licensing agreement, but it's not a strict copyright sign.
Okay.
So you're going to get Apache publicly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your commitment to AWS, is it bedrock? Is it forever embedded?
It's. I'm sorry. Can't be moved. Well, it's code. Anything could be removed, but as far as I know, we don't have any plans to remove it. We plan to support it in the long term. So yeah. Why do you ask? Okay. We do not have a problem with having it in there. I'll put it that way. Yeah. 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 As far as I know, there's not anyone contributing or using it that really has a gripe with that on our end. Yeah. It should not be hard. It should not be terribly hard. Upgrade testing is one of the things we really focus on. Basically, you upgrade the management server, and you point at it, and you're done. It's not particular. It's mostly like if you're on. You could either do a code up. If you're doing just built from source, you can do an upgrade that way, or you can just install a couple RPMs or a couple Debian packages, and you're done. It's. Well, with Zen Server or vSphere, there is none. With KVM, there is an agent that might need to be upgraded, but that's it. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Support rolling upgrades, as in this many nodes in the old version, this many nodes in the new version while we're upgrading, and is that cloud supposed to function?
Yeah. That should be, yeah. Yes, sir, back there.
Can you have multiple management servers?
Yes. Yeah.
So synced in with one, so one knows what the other one's doing, so if one dies, the other one can keep
Yes.
managing things?
Yeah.
Can you migrate hosts between clusters?
No. What you would do is you would basically so you can take a snapshot, you can make a template of one, and you can move that, but you don't migrate between clusters. So.
What about a high availability setup where you've got two data centers?
Uh-huh.
Can you split your cluster across two data centers?
You cannot split a cluster across two data centers, but you could do a zone. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Is the management server similar to the Citrix Zen centers? Are they identical?
No. Those are very different things. Yeah, basically, yeah, no, those are very different. So, any other questions? Hang on just a second. How am I doing on time? Am I getting? Huh? Okay. I just want to make sure I'm not cutting into anybody else. Yes, sir.
Is there any work on using ZFS on Linux as back-end storage for it?
I'm sorry, say again?
Is there anyone doing any work on using ZFS on Linux as back-end storage for it?
Not that I'm aware of. I have not seen a functional spec or anything for 4.1 on that now. Now, if you, yeah, no.
Is it difficult to do that kind of work?
Well, it would be difficult for me because I'm not a developer, but it didn't take very long to add, for example, Ceph RDB support and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, yeah. Sorry? As far as I know, yeah. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, say again? Yes. It depends on which networking setup you're using, whether you're using the security groups or VLANs. So it's basically, you're kind of defining some of that, but it does support it. So, other questions? Yeah, in the red shirt.
Is there anyone on the team managing the contribution to Debian by making sure they're up to date in Debian?
So currently we're not packaged in Debian. We have somebody who's doing Debian packages, but we're not currently in Debian.
Is there a roadmap for that?
There's not a current roadmap. It's being discussed, but basically we've got to figure out getting the bandwidth to get into the distributions or finding people in the distributions that want to pick it up. So, but right now it's basically as simple as adding, package repository and grabbing. So, yeah. Sorry, where?
Kept up to date with what? SID or with testing or stable with Debian repository?
No, it's up with stable. So we don't currently not up with that now. So, yeah.
How extensive is your automated test suite?
Not as extensive as we would like, but pretty extensive. That's one of the things that has been worked on very, very hard. Yeah.
Also following up with that?
Yeah.
Are you using gated commits, smoke tests, Garrett, anything of that nature to?
We're using Jenkins right now. Basically, every time there's a commit, it starts running the tests and then building everything over again. So we would like to move, I think, eventually to Garrett, but we're not there yet. We implemented, we have Review Board up right now, which was one of those, one of the drawbacks to Apache is getting infrastructure up is not always trivial. Yeah, so way in the back.
So you mentioned that you support a wide variety of different hypervisors.
Yeah,
Some of those hypervisors have features that aren't available with others.
yes.
How easy would it be, or difficult would it be to expose? I would assume that by default, CloudStack would support only the common denominator. How easy or difficult would it be to expose some of the features in one hypervisor to users?
So actually, I don't remember the specifics, but I do know there are some features we support, for example, in vSphere that aren't necessarily in KVM that are exposed. But generally, we do try to support a baseline across all the hypervisors. We also have a plug-in architecture, so it is not difficult to necessarily add support for something that isn't in the core. So you can expose features that way too. We're done? Okay. Thanks, folks. I would like to add that was the most thorough grilling I've gotten so far on this presentation. It's great. It's nice to know people are paying attention.